Name? Kurt Thomas. His title, three-time world gymnastics champion. His assignment, a secret mission for the United States government. His only weapon, himself. And that's all he needs. Combine the discipline, the timing, and the power of gymnastics with the explosive force of karate. And a new, all-powerful martial art is born. Gymkata. Kurt Thomas becomes Jonathan Cabot. He must penetrate a mountain fortress to compete in an ancient savage ritual. They call it the game. But nobody wins. And nobody lives. Until now. When gymnastics and karate are fused, the combustion becomes an explosion. And a new kind of martial arts superhero is born. Gymkata.
All right. Welcome. That was a trailer for a movie that came out in the 80s called Gymkata. After the 84 Olympics, the U.S. men's gymnastic team, they all got movie deals. And that was probably one of the worst of the films, with Mitch Gaylord's American Anthem as a close second. But, you know, gymnastics were hot, ninjas were hot, and the Cold War was really heating up. So today we're going to talk a little bit about China. China has been in the news of late because a story broke from the BBC about about a genocide, they say, that's going on with the ethnic minority group, the Uyghurs. Also, was it last spring? There were student protests that dominated the news cycle. So I've had this gentleman on the show before. He is a professor at New Mexico State. I met him through the great Gloria La Riva. Professor Ken Hammond, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here. Always glad to come.
And also, I usually do this first, and I apologize. My co-host, my homie, my dog, Pascal Robert.
Pleasure to be here. Good to see you again, Jason and Professor Hammond. Looking forward to your insights on China as well.
Well, we'll see how it goes, Pascal.
Well, when we think about China, and I'm trying not to say it like Donald Trump, so I apologize, but he just kind of burned in my head. He definitely really doubled down on whatever the Obama administration was trying to do, especially with the tariffs. And China gets a rap for being, you know, super authoritarian. Free speech is non-existent because they don't have these American platforms that we have, Facebook, and I believe there's no Twitter there. And the talk of the Uyghur genocide, I asked a question in the description of the show. Is it are they almost using the Me Too movement to kind of use it to weaponize it against China? Because we're hearing all these really horrible stories of forced hysterectomies, rape, and we don't want to belittle anybody's story, but as Pascal and I were saying before you came on, there is talk that some people feel that a lot of the protests in the West are, I wouldn't say a psyop. What did you call it, Pascal?
A color revolution.
But sponsored by the West?
Yes.
What would you say, Professor Hammond, about the average take that you see on China in just the mainstream media?
Sure. Well, I think the mainstream media is fairly united in putting out a pretty strong anti-China position, an anti-China narrative. I mean, you mentioned the all the things that are alleged to be going on in Xinjiang. Former Secretary of State Pompeo, of course, characterized that as genocide and crimes against humanity.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that that the portrayal that we see and what we hear about China in the news, whether it's Xinjiang or Tibet or Hong Kong or a number of other narratives that get put out on a pretty regular basis, they're all pretty uniformly negative, and they're all pretty well designed to foster a sense amongst Americans that China is kind of a terrible place, and we should be fearful of them, and they're at best a challenge, and really kind of our new enemy. And I think that's a really wrong, and I feel that that's not a very accurate or realistic portrayal of the what's going on in China today.
Mm-hmm. Somebody says, I feel that the mainstream media can be wrong on China, and that China is also guilty of atrocities at the same time. They are not mutually exclusive. I guess my question is, what are the atrocities that they would be guilty of? And I'm not saying they are not. I'm just asking the question: what are the atrocities
Well, you just mentioned some of these reports. There's kind of an endless stream of these stories that come out, and if we just think about Xinjiang.
Mm-hmm.
Xinjiang is a region in Western China where the population is primarily people of Turkic-speaking ethnicities, the Kazakhs, the Uyghurs, the Uzbeks, people like that.
Mm-hmm.
And these are Muslim societies. So the allegations, basically are built around the idea that the Chinese government is trying to destroy their traditional culture, trying to force people to behave in ways that are antithetical to their beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
that they're rounding people up and putting them in concentration camps and imposing these things like forced sterilization and all that. And unfortunately, that those kinds of reports and those kinds of stories get a lot of credibility in the mainstream media, but they tend to emanate just from two sources. One of them is a fellow who lives and works in Germany, a guy named Adrian Zenz.
Yeah.
And if you read the original reports, if you read the stories, one of the things that happens, of course, in the mainstream media is you get this echo chamber effect, where one publication puts something out and then a dozen others refer to that report as if that initial report was the gospel truth.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go back and you look at what the real sources of a lot of these stories are, they come from this figure, Adrian Zenz, who is, he's a fundamentalist Christian. He hasn't actually been to Xinjiang.
I was going to say, he's the guy that hasn't been there, right?
That's right. He gets a lot of messages from the Lord, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not opposed to messages from the Lord, but I think that we have to take them with a certain critical perspective. Mm-hmm. And so he generally is the one who puts out these tales. There have also been a lot of instances. There's an outfit in Australia called the Australian Strategic Defense Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And they have also been a source for a number of these stories, but many of their stories have been based upon things like satellite observations that turn out to be photos from Google Earth, which, when they're investigated, prove to be not detention camps or concentration camps, but schools, hospitals, residential compounds, things like that. I think that what we need to recognize is that a lot of this information is dependent upon the fact that that most Americans, most people in the West, have no direct knowledge or information, have no experience of China, haven't been to China, don't speak or read Chinese, and are entirely dependent upon these media and political outlets. So even though they may, they put a story out and it has this sensational headline, and then later you follow up with it, you find out, well, maybe it wasn't really accurate, maybe it was based on questionable informants. But if you do that over and over and over again, people begin to say, well, gosh, there must be something to this. It can't all be fabrications. It can't all be made up. But actually, if as I say, if you just trace the sources back, and that takes time and a certain deliberate effort, it turns out that these two sources are the principal outlets for this. There are also organizations, for example, the World Uyghur Congress, which are overtly political movements, anti-Chinese political movements that are part of the separatist agenda of trying to create to split Xinjiang off from China and create an Islamic republic. Now, that's something that I think any state is going to have a problem with, having forces that are trying to break up its territorial integrity and its political administration. So we can distinguish between the more overt agendas of organizations like the World Uyghur Congress and these other sources like Adrian Zenz and ASPI. But either way, we're not looking at information that is generally widely verified. And indeed, just recently, there's a book that's been put out by a French scholar who went and spent time living in Xinjiang, visiting a lot of places, in which he systematically debunks one after another of these stories and just argues pretty based on his direct observations that this is just not an accurate characterization. Are there tensions in Xinjiang? Are there people in Xinjiang who are involved with these movements against the Chinese government, who are in favor of splitting off an Islamic republic from China? Sure. But how much do they represent the will of the people? How much do they reflect, broader social attitudes? I think that's highly problematic.
So in your mind, is it one of those things where it's like, if I go interview the most revolutionary cat in downtown Oakland and say that he is the mouthpiece of everybody here, you might think that we're trying to start a new Black Republic here in Oakland? Is that what you're saying?
that would be an interesting analogy. Yeah. I mean, we know, for example, that the United States itself, it isn't that the United States is just a passive recipient of this kind of information. Organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy, which is funded by Congress and is a semi clandestine organization. Some of their activities are public, some of them are carried on behind the scenes, but that they have been involved in these so-called color revolutions all over the world, and they go in and they very directly and explicitly support any kind of activity that is designed to undermine the credibility or the viability of governments to which the United States government is opposed. And the U.S. wants to put political pressure on China because of China's economic development, because of China's increasing role in global affairs, in East Asian affairs. They want to at least put pressure on them to try to thwart their emergence as a regional kind of power, and to dismiss the idea that there's an agenda behind these stories, that there's somebody who's kind of encouraging, shall we say, these movements. I think that's naive, and I think that we have to recognize that power politics is involved here on a very profound scale.
Did you have a question, Pascal?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to really address to the brass tacks is that how much is the projection that we see in American media and American intelligence discourse towards China basically coming from the fact that the United States sees China as a potential counter hegemon to American and NATO world, offering options to third developing world and developing nations in terms of cooperation, as we see in China and Africa and other parts of the world, that the West may be left out of its traditional role as the arbiter of affairs on the globe, when China may actually be able to more effectively play that role. How much is that consideration?
Oh, I think that you hit the nail right on the head. I think that's exactly the underlying agenda here, that the United States, for several generations now, certainly since the end of World War II, has been the preeminent power certainly in the global capitalist system, and since the fall of the Soviet Union has really been the dominant power on the earth, and has had it. We've kind of had it our way if you're the American government for a long, long time. So that is, their perception. The perception of the ruling elites in America is that if China comes on the scene, if China becomes more prosperous, more highly developed, more economically competitive, and if it presents itself in the region and in a larger global arena as a legitimate participant, that's a threat to continued American dominance, continued what we call American hegemony. And I think that that threat is deeply unsettling. They see it as a zero-sum game. That China's rise must be a threat to America's continued power and prestige and preeminence. And I think that that's an unfortunate perception, because I think that from the point of view of the American people, it would be better if the two countries could find ways to cooperate and collaborate. China did a much better job than the United States has in managing COVID. They're making tremendous strides in trying to deal with global warming and climate change. They're pushing all kinds of programs that are designed to produce a better quality of life for their people, and to some extent to share that with a wider global, in the wider global arena. Now, that doesn't mean that China is perfect. That doesn't mean that China is some kind of workers' paradise, that everything is just roses and flowers and all that every day in China. China has serious problems. There's a lot of corruption in the system. They got serious environmental challenges and problems. There's a lot of things that are problematic. There's a lot of difficulties that China is facing, and it's not like everybody over there is just let's have one big group hug. But I think that to demonize China and to think that China is sort of the new evil empire that has to be somehow contained and blocked and thwarted in its efforts to improve its economy and the livelihood of its people, I think that that's a misplaced apprehension. Certainly by American people. It may be that China's rise does pose challenges of one type or another to American elites, to American business interests, to American military and political interests. But, maybe it's time for the United States to find ways to share the planet with other powers. The idea that the world should simply be the playground, the arena for the extension of American policy interests, that seems unrealistic in the world in which we find ourselves today. I think a more multi-centric global order is what's emerging, and I think that that's probably something that we should welcome.
Interesting. Do you think that the concerns that the West has about China, particularly when my interest in China on the African continent, there are many in the United States, particularly many members of the African diaspora, some would call themselves Pan-Africanists, who are a little leery of China's emerging development and role on the African continent in terms of whether or not it's an actual bilateral, mutually beneficial kind of relationship, or is China actually coming into the African continent as the new style colonial power with a kind of exploitative model of extraction that really threatens the sovereignty and the integrity of the nation states in Africa? Now, there are others. I've heard many Africans say that China provides a more humane option in terms of bilateral participation than the West traditionally does. I'd like to hear your thoughts more in terms of China's role in Africa, and if it's a mutually beneficial role, or are the threats of exploitation that some fear more reality than others would care to discuss?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that if I were in government or in some sort of policy position or public discourse position in Africa, I think that there's been such a long history of outsiders coming into Africa in pursuit of their own agendas, whether it was European imperialism in the 19th century or American sort of neo-colonialism since World War II. I'd be a little wary. I'd be a little anxious about what was going on, when some new force, some new players show up on the scene. But I think that if we look objectively at what China has been doing, and of course this isn't just in Africa. The things like the Belt and Road Initiative, extend to other parts of Asia, even to parts of Europe. And these are efforts, like many of the undertakings in Africa, that are designed to develop essentially global economic infrastructure, communications, transportation, productive activities, things like that. And these are things which I think China certainly talks about and wants to present as a matter of kind of mutually beneficial development. The idea that these are investments that are going to pay off in the long run, that are going to be useful for the people in these host countries, and that it's a developmental initiative. And I think that's not a completely unreasonable position. On the other hand, China isn't doing this as a sort of a charity. China isn't doing this just out of the goodness of its heart. These are initiatives which will certainly be in the long-term interest of China itself. Now, does that mean, does that mean that these are exploitive relationships? Does that construct these relationships as oppressive? I don't think that necessarily that's the only way to read that. Certainly, when China goes into a country in Africa and helps to develop infrastructure, helps to build port facilities or roadways or railways or airports, I think that those are things that are certainly going to be of value and use to the local economy. China is also investing in extractive industries and in agriculture. There's no question about that. Does the development of that kind of economic activity, is that something that only benefits China? No. Is it something that only benefits the host country? No. These are things that China is doing as investments, as part of its own ongoing project to develop its own economy. But China it sees, it understands that happens in the modern world in the context of a global economy. So, it's a complex set of relationships. I think that one thing to look at, and perhaps give a little nuance to all that, is that right now, in this context of the COVID pandemic, China has been, on the one hand, forgiving debt, and on the other, rescheduling debt repayment in some instances, because a lot of these countries have been hard hit by the pandemic, and they're struggling and they're having a hard time with their domestic economies. And organizations like the World Bank and the IMF, that go in and they dictate to these countries when their schedules of repayment are, and then there's all these penalties that go along with that. That's not how China has been handling this. They've been trying to be sensitive. They've been trying to accommodate the needs and the concerns of these countries in this immediate sort of crisis context. Now, of course, you can turn around and argue, well, of course, they want to maintain these relationships so that they'll get paid back in the long run. That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. They do want to get paid back in the long run. As I say, it's not a giveaway. It's not a charity program. It's a program of mutually beneficial development. Does it proceed completely frictionless? No, of course not. On the other hand, another way to look at it, and this reflects some of the complexity of these critiques, is that on the one hand, we're told that China is going in and being the new sort of neo-colonialist power, but it's also the case that China, one of the fundamental tenets of Chinese foreign policy since the 1950s, has been non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. And so what that means is that when China extends loans or engages in investment activity, infrastructure development activity with countries in Africa and other places, that they don't impose political conditions. They don't go in and say, the way that the IMF or the World Bank or the United States government does, they don't go in and say, you need to do this, you need to restructure your welfare society, your welfare payments, you need to reform, you need to have a balanced budget and you can't have any deficit financing. They don't do that kind of stuff because they don't want to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. So on the one hand, they get criticized for going into these countries and investing in them and engaging in these developmental activities. But then they also get criticized for not imposing political conditions. And it seems to me that there's kind of a, damned if you do and damned if you don't approach by the West to these activities on China's part.
Interesting. So what you're saying is that generally is that, China is acting in its natural interest as in a bilateral way with the African countries, but that in terms of the options, considering the past, dealing with the IMF, the World Bank, and the U.S., you are optimistic that it provides a better option for the African nations. At the same time, it may not be exploitative in the same way, but it still is acting within the interest of China while providing benefit to these nation states on the African continent that they may not have. Well, there have been criticisms by some about the way in which China penalizes the African countries for lack of loan repayment. For example, extracting resources, seizing assets, seizing banks, which are a few incidents that have happened as of late in terms of China's kind of response to the inability of African countries to pay back on their debt servicing as supported by China. My position is not to take a yes or no either or position. My position is to not necessarily paint China as, the savior of all of the third and developing world, going back to the notions of the Bandung Conference, or to pose China as the new red menace. What I'm saying is that I think that we should acknowledge, and I think you have done so, that these are definitely more complicated, nuanced relationships between both actors. My question to you is that, do you think that we should be, or those of us who are interested in kind of global South continuum that challenges the traditional hegemony of Western nations like the U.S. and like European, like the very colonial empires, that we should be vested in a cooperation between China, Africa, and the global South? Are we being naive in thinking that something like that is aspirational in the first place? Or should we traditionally feel that such type of cooperation won't bode well for those countries that are not exactly in the best negotiating power?
Well, I think that there's a couple of ways that countries in Africa and in other parts of the world can pursue their interests. One, of course, is through as you've mentioned, Pan-African solidarity. Obviously, China is a huge country with now perhaps the largest economy in the world. It's got a lot of there's a lot of momentum, a lot of force, in their economic activities, and it's better if countries, not just in Africa, as I say, but elsewhere as well, can show some solidarity, show some mutual support amongst themselves. But I think the bottom line has got to be, and this isn't something that gets resolved in a weekend review of something, but the question overall is going to be, how beneficial are these programs? How well do things work for the countries that are hosting them? And I think that on the balance, most of the countries that are on the receiving end have derived significant benefits from this. As I say, China's not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. It's not a charity program, and of course they're going to be seeking their own best interests as well. But they have, they're certainly publicly committed to working with these local governments and local business concerns and things like that. And I think that any of these projects, any of these initiatives going on with China, we need to be critical, we need to be observant, and we need to see how that plays out in the long run. But I don't think that we're seeing a situation in which African countries are finding themselves, newly impoverished or newly exploited in anywhere near the ways that Europe or Americans have for a century and a half and more. I think that China's trying to build a system of mutually beneficial development, and to the extent to which that can be encouraged and that can be monitored, I think that that's a positive initiative overall.
Now, someone in the chat's been sharing some articles, right? Because that's what it always boils down to with these discussions. It's like, well, I'll share an article, and there's the proof, and I guess one of them was that, and we can't see, unfortunately, with the platform we're using, we can't see what it is you're sharing when you do that. But I guess one of them is about the China not having the BBC anymore. And another one was a confession from a Uyghur man about his time in a Uyghur concentration camp. I also like to add the fact that, and again, this isn't to say that, or what do you call it? This isn't whataboutism, but I do love the fact that everybody loves to pile on China, but I never hear anyone talk about Myanmar, Burma, and the Rohingya, where you actually saw a migration of people, a ethnic minority, move to neighboring Bangladesh, and you see the issues that they're having there, even with the president, who wasn't she a Nobel laureate for her work there, trying to work with the military. Now she's got thrown out. And you see what's going on with the Rohingya. I believe it's the numbers in the hundreds of thousands that have been killed over there, and it doesn't seem to get the same attention. And as I was telling Pascal, I was talking with another friend, Professor Dr. Asatar Bear. We were talking about this, and the first thing he said is, whenever there's a genocide, there's always a migration of people. And he goes, where is it at?
Yeah.
When it comes to the Uyghurs. So I don't know if you wanted to add on to that.
Well, I think, you mentioned of the situation in Myanmar, and of course they're having a lot of turmoil there right now. The about 600,000 Rohingya, fled across the border into Bangladesh. The Rohingya are a Muslim community. The part of Myanmar where they live used to be a separate Muslim society called Arakan. Now that was incorporated into the old Burmese state a long time ago in the late 18th century, but those tensions, those antagonisms, persist in that area. Myanmar is plagued by a profusion of tensions between the dominant ethnic group, the Bamars, the Burmans, and dozens, literally, of smaller ethnic communities, mostly located around the fringes of the borders, with Bangladesh, with India, with China, Laos, Thailand, all the way around the borders of Myanmar. And I think that, as you say, the situation there has been pretty stark and very dire for the Rohingya people, and it gets some coverage. It gets, when there's a military coup like there's going on right now, then you'll get some headlines and some sort of pro forma condemnations by Western political leaders. But it's not at all like this kind of relentless campaign
Yeah.
of trying to talk about Xinjiang. And as you say, I mean, there hasn't been some sort of mass exodus over the border into Kazakhstan. You know, I mean, Xinjiang has huge borders with several Central Asian countries. We haven't seen any kind of flood of refugees. And I was reading a news report just a couple days ago, an interview with a Uyghur gentleman from Xinjiang. Talking about his experience and talking about how stupid it would be on the part of the Chinese government. The central government is trying to develop Xinjiang. It has tremendous energy resources. Some people call it like the Texas of China. I've been out there. I've traveled out there and spent time in
and isn't Xinjiang? And I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's okay.
Isn't Xinjiang in the middle of where this Belt and Road is going? Isn't that one of the places it's going through?
Well, Xinjiang is right along what used to be called the Silk Road, the old trade routes from China to Central Asia and on to India and Persia and the Mediterranean and all that. Mm-hmm. Yes, one of the components of the Belt and Road Initiative has been the construction of railways. It's now possible to put freight containers on trains in Shanghai or in Guangzhou in southern China, and have them go all the way to ports on the Baltic or the North Sea or the Atlantic, in one continuous journey. And that has revolutionized transportation times. It's just cut down. It's facilitated a lot of transcontinental trade. The other side, of course, is in the maritime world, and that's a whole different realm. Yeah. But there's also been the construction of major energy pipelines, oil and natural gas coming from Kazakhstan, for example, or Turkmenistan, both coming into China, but also some of that goes on to the west. So yeah, there's been a lot of development going on out there.
Can you talk more about the Belt and Road initiatives, its long-term goals, and particularly how it's perceived to present a threat to, that American hegemony in the area as well?
Well, sure. I mean, if you think about it, that's a fairly straightforward concept. That the Belt and Road Initiative is designed, and the Chinese are totally upfront about this. This isn't like some sneaky, underhanded, program. The Belt and Road Initiative is designed to develop international economic development infrastructure. So, as I say, railways across Central Asia, port facilities, other kinds of transport facilities, railways, roadways in Africa, airports, things like that, to facilitate the transportation of goods and the communication of services around Asia, Africa, even some parts of Europe. And to the degree to which that is a successful endeavor, to the extent to which those new connections, those new intersections are successful and built up and work, that's going to facilitate a course, an itinerary of development, which will be beneficial to China. It'll be beneficial to the host countries, but it's gonna contain a lot of that activity within the African and Eurasian communities, and so American interests can, if they choose to do so, can see that as antagonistic. They can see that as these guys are developing all this trade, all this interconnection, all this infrastructure over there. What about us? Isn't that just excluding us, right? And of course, the premise for that is that American capital should be able to go wherever it wants, do whatever it wants, without any restrictions, without any constraints, and without any competition, right? And so I think that's really at the bottom line, is that the Belt and Road Initiative is seen as creating economic opportunities that are not primarily focused on benefiting American capital. And so, that becomes a bad thing. That becomes an antagonism. That becomes a threat, if you will, to the ongoing profitability of American, capitalism.
How would you say the myth of the yellow peril, which is the way the West used to look at the Asia threat, or the threat of China, figured in to how exactly the consciousness of China and Asia overall works into the psyche of the American liberal elite?
Well, I think that is a sad and very unfortunate component of all this, because I think that kind of racist antagonism gets played to all too frequently. I think that, for example, under the previous administration, Trump and his cohort loved to talk about the China virus and the Wuhan virus and things like that. Really portraying China as a place of menace, as a place of threat. This idea that China's military development, and China's military budget is just a tiny fraction of that of the United States, and yet the fact that they have any military at all is seen as undermining America's unrestricted capacity to project power wherever it wants. And I think that we see that idea of the yellow peril, unfortunately, manifesting itself right here at home. There has been in the last year or so a real upswing in racist attacks, violent attacks on really people of any kind of Asian ancestry. I think a lot of people in the United States don't necessarily have a very sophisticated discrimination between who's Japanese or Korean or Chinese or Bangladeshi or whatever. And so, there have been people of a number of Asian ancestries who have been physically attacked, subjected to verbal abuse, harassed in many places across the country. And I think that kind of racism, that kind of anti-Asian, anti-Chinese racism, is part and parcel of the demonization of China, which is carried on, by politicians and the media pretty much on a daily basis.
Someone asked, obviously in recent times, China has become more subsumed by capitalism. Has the agenda of building towards communism been completely abandoned? That's from Sam.
Yeah, well, that's a very powerful question, and I think that there's a long history that goes into dealing with that particular question. There's no question about it, though, that China is engaged in the global capitalist system. The global capitalist system is the system that exists on the planet. Unless you're going to sort of put walls around yourself and try to, go your own way, and rely entirely on your native local resources, that engagement with the global economy is a pretty compelling necessity. I think that when we look at China today, what we see is not a capitalist society. We don't see a society in which capitalism, a capitalist class, a bourgeoisie, is in control of the government, or is even in control of the economy. China has what we might call a hybrid economy, a mixed economy. 30, 40 years ago, the Chinese made the decision that in order to develop their economy, to develop the productive capacity of their economy, to raise the material standard of living of their people, that they would use market mechanisms. They would use markets to pursue that. Markets are often very effective in the allocation of resources for development and things like that. Karl Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, the first part of that is a whole text about how productive the rise of the bourgeoisie was, how the European economy flourished, that they would under the development of early capitalism. Now, what the difference is, the reason that I say that it's not just a capitalist economy, is that China is still led by the Chinese Communist Party. And the Chinese Communist Party is their goal, their objective is, on the one hand, to develop the economy, to enrich the country, to aggregate social wealth, but to do that in a way in which the party retains overall control and is able to, on the one hand, buffer the worst excesses of corruption and of abuse, and now even able to begin to address some of the environmental damage that rapid development has produced. There's no question that the use of markets brings with it all kinds of problems, greater inequality, these environmental challenges that the Chinese have been facing, very serious ones. And as I've said a few times, corruption has been a serious problem. But the party is there. The party is there to try to manage that, to try to smooth that out to whatever extent is possible. And what they say about what they're doing is that the goal is to attain first, what they call today the initial stage of socialism, to build on that, to rise to a higher stage with the goal of a communist future. But that's even Chairman Mao back in the 1950s and 60s said this was a goal that was going to take decades, if not centuries, to attain. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I think that's a pragmatic approach. Is that going to work? Is the Chinese Communist Party going to be successful in leading that process? Are they going to be able to retain the political high ground and lead that process? I think that's still something of an open question. But I think that the approach that people on the left in the United States and elsewhere in the West need to take is not to sort of buy into the Western imperialist narrative of demonizing China, but is to try to see China critically, to be supportive of those things in China which we see as contributing to its development and to enhancing the livelihoods of the people, while being critical of the things that we see as problematic, the inequality, the environmental problems, the corruption, things like that. I think that we want to be, one of the things you hear about China a lot is, and in the West, this gets portrayed as sort of anti-government sentiment, is that there's a lot of unrest. There's wildcat strikes. There's demonstrations against real estate projects and factory construction and pollution and things like that. I think that's great. I think that the Chinese people fight for their rights. They fight for their interests. And what we hear about are the instances where where injustice prevails. What we don't hear about are the many other instances where people prevail, where factories get stopped, where pollution is cleaned up, where wages are rise, where safety conditions are improved. It's a struggle. It's an ongoing movement. And again, it's as we talked about with the Belt and Road and stuff. It's not perfect. It's not a worker's paradise. It's not it's a rough and tumble, feeling your way, crossing the river by feeling the rocks, as they say, kind of process. And as I say, I don't think there's a guarantee on how it's going to turn out. But I think that as leftists, as revolutionaries, socialists, communists, we should be as encouraging and as supportive as possible, while always maintaining a critical perspective.
There's some questions here in the chat. Carrie Robinson says, I think that if China wanted to pursue communism, they would need to advocate for a global worker initiative, which is opposite of their choice of apolitical power that they exercise in the world. Would you guys agree with that statement?
Well, again, Chinese foreign policy since the 50s, when certainly nobody thought that they were anything but revolutionary, has always been based on non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. Just as China doesn't want the United States interfering in its internal affairs, China's pretty careful about not trying to do that in other countries. I think that, again, it's not a approach. It's not a frictionless process. But I think, if anything, China's hope, perhaps aspiration, is that if they can be successful at developing their economy, at raising the quality of life of their people. And remember that just this past year, China finally achieved a situation where they've lifted all of the people in China above the United Nations internationally recognized line of absolute poverty. They've lifted 800 plus million people up to a better life.
Jesus.
Now, that seems to me like a pretty significant accomplishment.
We're fighting over checks for $1,400.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult comparison. But yeah, I just feel that I don't know. I guess that what they're accomplishing, what they're trying to accomplish, is pretty legit, and we need to try to be as supportive of that as possible. Even though as I say, and I don't want to paint them as the glorious vanguard of everything, but I think that to suggest that China has simply that the Chinese Communist Party has simply abandoned the path to socialism, the quest for socialism, I think that's a fundamental misreading of the realities of what's happening in the country.
Do you think the way in which they are deemed, China has been deemed as state capitalism, is a fair assessment of their economy, or do you think that's a rather myopic way to explain how their economy functions?
Well, of course, in China, for a long time, in the old society and old Confucianism, they used to talk about what they called the rectification of names, the idea that you have to call things by what they are. You have to use the right term for what you're talking about. And I think that to call it state, do we call it state capitalism? What's the right term? The term that I use, what the Chinese call it, is socialism with Chinese characteristics. I think that referring to it, I often talk about it as a type of market socialism. The state-owned enterprises are still the core of the productive economy. The banking and finance sector is still state-owned and managed. Those are public assets and resources. Yes, there's a private economy. Yes, there are capitalists in China, and I think that that's where a lot of the dynamism in the economy has come from. You have capitalists in China, but you don't have a capitalist class that dominates the state, because the state and the Communist Party work together on this agenda of moving towards what they call a moderately prosperous society, trying to, as I say, smooth out the worst aspects of impacts of the market. But it's a work in progress. It's an experiment that's still underway. And as I say, I can't personally predict or guarantee what the outcome is going to be.
We have another question. What can you tell us about strikes and grassroots labor organizing among Chinese workers?
Well, there's lots of strikes, I can tell you that. There's workers in factories in China, workers on construction sites in China. They're in an interesting kind of liminal position. These are people, for the most part, who have left their villages, left the homes where they had grown up, to go to the cities, to work in factories, to work on construction sites, to take part in labor, because that's a better living. They're going to make more money. They're going to have more access to resources than what they're going to find if they stay home in the countryside. On the other hand, there is no question that labor, that surplus value is extracted from labor in China. That's a conscious policy of the government, and indeed that was done in the first 30 years of the People's Republic during the Maoist period, because that's how capital is accumulated for development, for investment, for for other purposes as well, for social services as well. So yes, workers in Chinese factories, workers on construction sites, workers in the agricultural sector as well. They work, they produce value. Some of that value is going to, is going away from them. Now, some of that, if they're working in the private sector, is going into the hands of capitalists. That's absolutely true. But that is part of this process of development. Attaining socialism isn't a matter of flipping a light switch. It's not something that happens because it's a great idea, so let's all get together and now we'll be socialists. It's something that has to be built from the ground up in a long and sometimes perhaps painful process of development.
Another question here. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Pascal is just sleeping on the job. That's the problem. I'm messing with you, man. Have to commend you guys once again. Brilliant guests, brilliant joint hosts. It's not easy to find such great dialectic on this platform, but you keep knocking it out of the park. Hey, thank you, Sam. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So, side note, for those of you guys new to the show, you've just been watching this on a live stream. For the better part of last year, I did this show audio only, and after interviewing legendary Gloria La Riva, I think I asked a question in our conversation. I was like, do you know anyone that knows anything about China? And she referred me to Professor Hammond, and there's a show I have. It's a much older show. I want to say it's like episode 30. We're at episode 1. But it's very similar to what you're seeing now. It's me asking Professor Hammond a lot of myth-busting questions, more so about the history of China. So that got us talking about doing an animated series,
right?
Which the professor and I are gonna have another conversation about this tomorrow without you people. But we got the first pass on the animation. Professor, I'll let you explain what you did, because I think it's hilarious what you said about me coming to you about the Chinese history in 2 minutes.
Well, it's a challenge, the idea being that we want to produce this series of little 2-minute YouTube type videos, animations to try and explicate some of the complexities of Chinese history, and it's let's just say it's an audacious undertaking, but we did just get the first first run through, the first draft of that, and it looks great, and I hope that we're going to be able to develop this into a more full-blown exposition. So yeah, we're going to be talking about that tomorrow. I'm looking forward to it.
And the first run through is the professor had this chart of China through the centuries,
right? And
I narrate a monologue script that he did, and I made some music to it, and a wonderful animator animated Jamie Loftus, I think is her name. She has the Lolita podcast. So if you guys are familiar with the very well-known Lolita podcast and the show Robot Chicken, that's who's actually animating this idea that I had. So it's not just Professor Hammond. Gloria La Riva is also going to do a history of the Cuban Revolution and the Bolivarian Revolution. I spoke with Rob Larson, is going to do a history of monopoly in the tech world.
Great. So we're in revolution too.
Pascal already. So basically, anytime I have a conversation with someone on the show that you guys find interesting, when it's all said and done, I go back and ask these people if they'd be down to be part of this project. So that's part of the project. That's also why we always ask, hey, if you guys can be a patron, you really help out, because these animators don't come free. So
don't forget to subscribe to the page, check like, hit the bell button as well, so you get the notification when our videos come up on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays.
Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
All right.
Anything you're hawking, Professor Hammond, other than knowledge?
No. I'm just glad to be here. Let me know when you want to take another round of this. It's always fun.
I'm excited. So I fell down this rabbit hole today, and Pascal will tell you. I don't know if anybody here is an Adam Curtis fan in the chat. Let me know. Yes, young man. I don't know if you guys saw that, but my son just ran in here to mean mug me. But so we do a show now. This show will be on Zero Books next week, and I'm in conversation with Doug Lane. And he says, "Oh, Adam Curtis has a new documentary." Sends me the trailer to it, and it has I'm probably going to say her name wrong. Zhao Zhang, Mao's second one.
Yeah.
Zhao Zhang. Some guy named Michael X that I had never heard of in my life. You're an OG, Professor Hammond. You're an OG leftist. You ever heard of some black dude named Michael X from the UK?
I can't say that I have.
I haven't met anybody that knows this cat. And Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mom.
Ah.
And basically, so far, I'm only 1.5 episodes in. It's they're talking about revolution. I'm going to play the trailer before we go, so you guys can see it. To get all pumped up to watch it. I had to get a VPN just to watch it. It's only in the BBC. But Pascal, are you ready?
I'm interested in watching that documentary, but I think that Professor Hammond really, in a very succinct fashion, was able to address some of the major concerns that some in the West have with China, and to really penetrate the more noxious veneer of propaganda that we get through the West as well about this country that has demonstrated some of its greatest ability in poverty reduction in modern history, and that is not getting its fair share only because the United States, in basically its kind of empire-like greed, tries to paint China as a threat to American and Western hegemony. And I think that I definitely agree with you that that's problematic. But in the same way in which you advise leftists to provide support to China and look to them for some type of support, I think we should also not be afraid to be critical when we see, the Chinese Communist Party acting in a way that is unjust and working to the detriment of its citizens or the working class in the country as well. So, I take you to heart in that regard.
All right.
And as Pascal was saying those very wonderful parting words, my son looked right at me and farted.
Very nice.
Just stared me down right in the face, and I was like, shh. Loud farting ass kid. So because of this and getting the VPN, getting all excited about this new Adam Curtis series, every Tuesday morning, 9:00 Pacific Standard Time, I do a live stream with the Left Flank Vets, and we talked about streaming this series every Tuesday, and there's 6 of them. So for 6 weeks, we'll stream this series and break it down, and I'm sure the Left Flank will break it down, and I'm going to give everybody the login to my VPN that needs it so they can watch it and they can break it down. Because it's a pretty interesting take, definitely when it comes to revolution. And there was a part of me that was going to send it to you, Professor Hammond, beforehand to let you look at it, to see what your take was on it. Because Adam Curtis puts Zhao Zhang in kind of a really big power position. Did she have a hell of a power position towards the end of Mao's life?
Yeah.
And he paints her as a bit of a vindictive ladder climber.
She has a very complex legacy. We'll go into that another time.
So I'm going to let you guys check out this trailer. Thank you, Professor Hammond. And after this trailer's over, we are out.
All right.
Thursday.
I'm going to get going. It's great to see you guys. And as I say, give me a holler and we'll do this again.
Hey, thank you so much. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right. Yes, you bet. We'll see you tomorrow.
Peace.
Good night, comrades.
Good night.
I really wanted you. I want to show the animation for you guys, but I haven't heard back if it's cool from Jamie yet to show the first pass. So I will wait. We'll wait after this Friday meeting, and then hopefully Saturday I can show you guys a little stream of this. But check out this this trailer for. Can you see him?
I see him.
Okay. Phoenix, what are you doing? Daddy's hosting a show. You don't care? He's hiding. So Pascal, you have to say, where's Phoenix?
Where's Phoenix?
He's hiding some more. Okay. So here's a trailer for the new Adam Curtis documentary, Can't Get You Out of My Head. Also, a person that plays a big role in this is Afeni Shakur and Tupac. It's really interesting. He really gets into Afeni Shakur's story in the second episode. So let's watch this. Enjoy. Get ready. If anybody can't watch it or can't find anywhere to stream it, let me know. I found some US sites that are streaming it. And if not, we can share this VPN, right? Because we're all homies in this. So real talk, you never seen that motherfucker before in your life too, right? That Michael X cat?
Nah.
All right, I'm gonna shut up. Dude, does that look cool?
Definitely looks like the guy who did the Century of the Self.
Yes. Told you it's very arty. Are you interested in that though? You can see the first 2 episodes on YouTube.
Oh, the first 2 episodes on YouTube?
Mm-hmm.
I'll test the waters on those.
I'm in it right now. I told you I got notes. I've been writing from it. This Michael X character is just fascinating to me.
You're obsessed with Michael X.
How can you just not know about some random dude like that? He said in a big time interview, he was like, I'm the most powerful black man in all of Europe. I'm like, I've never heard of you. You're like Kaiser Soze. I'm gonna stop saying that. Ultimately, I won't spoil anything. So Tuesday, 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, me and Marcus from the Left Flank Let's are going to be watching episode 1 And definitely the left flank has a ton of comments that come through. We'll definitely be talking to you guys on the chat. Thank you guys very much. Saturday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, we'll be doing a live stream. It looks like we'll be doing it. Conan Neutron possibly is coming back Saturday.
What about Marcus?
Marcus should be there Saturday. Saturday might be a little more jam-packed because there's like 4 or 5 things I'm trying to do on Saturday that I haven't told Pascal yet, that I'm about to tell him as soon